welcome to the show. I am your host, Misty Doan, and as always, I am joined by the incredible Liz.
Hello.
Behind the camera. She's here to call out questions along the way, make sure we answer everything as best as we can to make it nice and clear for you. So yeah, we're excited. I'm really excited about today's project. This was one that started with one idea and quickly evolved into something different.
You gotta love that.
I love that. You know, when you sit down to play, as we're designing, it's really fun to kind of see that journey. So I brought some of the pieces along with me to show you some of that process. But let's talk a little bit about what you're going to need to make this quilt behind me. It's called Radiant Squares, and you're going to need one pack of 5-inch squares. I've used just solid black back here behind me. So these are some Kona black 5-inch squares. And then you're going to need 3 rolls of these skinny strips, which are 1.5 inches. And this is the neutrals palette, which I think is a really awesome kind of masculine feel to this quilt, which is really nice. Like I said, 3 of these. And then you're also going to need a 1/2 yard of coordinating fabric, and so that's just to finish off some of these squares, and then a 1/2 yard for your little border here, and that's it. We can dive.
And the skinny strips, those are not the regular 2.5 inch strips. These are 1.5 inch strips.
Exactly, they
just
are
call that out.
a little skinnier.
Right.
So not your traditional jelly roll width. They're 1.5 inches instead of 2.5.
Awesome.
Oh, and one more thing, you will want our 10-inch paper piecing squares here that we have at Missouri Star. So those come in a package. You're going to need those because this is going to be all foundation pieced, because with this style of quilting, you do get a little bit of stretch because we're putting things on the bias. So it's very helpful to have that foundation paper to keep things from pulling too much and getting too wonky.
Stabilizes it, makes it all easy to do.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
It makes it your friend in the end. And I like to also have one of these 10-inch squares handy. Any square ruler will do, but because this is the block size we're going for, having it 10 inches is really handy. One more thing you're going to need is this glue stick. I am using this Roxanne glue stick. It's really great. It doesn't gum up your needle, and we have it here at Missouri Star. So let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, I like to take my 10-inch paper square, and I'm going to fold it in half both directions. This is just going to give me kind of a guide for where I want to place my center square. So I folded it that way and this way. It doesn't have to be perfect, just as close as possible. This quilt design really is just kind of go with the flow and free. You don't want to stress too much about it. And then I'm going to pull out one of my 5-inch squares here, and I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of glue just on those middle lines. I don't need a ton, and I'm going to lay the points of my background square on those lines that I creased. All right, you can see just a little bit holds it on there great. We don't have to worry about that anymore. So now let's talk about the design itself. This is the basis of every single block. So I went ahead and took all of my squares, and you can see it's 6 across by 7 down, so we have 42, the number that's in your charm pack. I went ahead and got all of these ready to go because this is a quilt that's really easy to chain piece. So you can just sit through, fold, and glue all of your centers on your 42 foundation pieces. And then as you can see here, I have divided my light strips and my dark strips on every single block. And this is where I want to talk a little bit about the design process, because on my first few blocks, let me show you here, I did not do that. They were just really scrappy. You can see I just mixed it all up, and they're also very fun, but when I put it together, I didn't feel like I was getting any magic or ooh-ah in between. And that's one of the things I love about quilting is when you put your blocks together, what happens then?
That secondary
pattern.
That
secondary pattern. And so I wanted to make sure that I did this in a way that something magical would happen when I put my blocks together. So you can see just by dividing my lights and my darks on either side, we get this kind of radiating pattern that then runs through it. And that's just by choosing where you put your fabric. So
it's such a cool effect.
I think so too. And so you can see the difference between like these blocks here and these ones here. Yeah. How it gives you, you know, a lot of a place to rest for your eye for one, and then just a lot of variety when you go to lay this out. And, you know, there's a lot of other ways to lay this out as well. So play with it, and I think you'll be really excited about the result.
So how did you decide which ones were lights and which ones were darks when they're sort of in the middle?
That's a good question. Sometimes they're both. Sometimes I use them in both places. It really just depends. And I kind of tried to use as true of a light as I could next to my center square, just to make it really obvious to my brain as I was working. But you can see in here, there's a few that are definitely more mediums, and you just have to make it work. And because most of the colors of fabric around them are lighter, your eye reads it as a light.
Okay.
And so don't be afraid to, you know, use some of those midtones on both sides if you need to.
Okay.
That's a great question, Liz. All right. So hopefully you found that interesting. I thought it was really fun as I was playing with it. So now let's dive into how easy it is to actually make this block. So like I said, we've got this center 5-inch square on our foundation paper. And now I just have some strips here left over from one of my honey buns when I was working on this. So let's just go ahead and get started. I always like to start with the light, and I'm actually going to use the same color on 2 seams. So you can see here, this is the same color, this is the same color. And so I'm repeating them in the block.
Okay.
And so let's start with that. Just gonna take this to the sewing machine.
So it's a slightly different kind of chain piece. You're not using the same on like 3 blocks in a row.
Exactly.
You're using the 2 sides of the same block. Okay.
Exactly. And if you manage it really well, like I'll do, you know, 2 and then set it in a pile, 2 and set it in a pile. And I guess it's more assembly line than chain piecing.
Sure.
But it made it go quicker as I was assembling these for sure.
It feels like a really good approach. Just want to make sure I'm
following
along.
I appreciate that. Okay. And so I don't know if you guys can see here, but the papers are sheer. I do have my diagonal seam tape on my machine as usual. And so I can still see when I set this on my 1/4-inch line through the paper, which I think is really useful. You don't need to worry about that. This is a pattern that if you want to get really crazy and wonky, it's still going to look awesome. But if you want it to be more precise, you can totally use that as a guide.
Cool.
And so I think that's a great tip as well. So now we're just going to sew like normal.
Do you find when you're using foundation paper that you slow down your stitching or use a different stitch length?
I go ahead and shorten my stitch length a little bit just because we are using that foundation paper. We're going to want to tear that off when we're finished with this quilt, and by using that smaller stitch length, it perforates it more, makes it easier to tear. So make sure you do that so you don't have to work too hard. And then I actually just use my scissors and I line them up right along the edge of that square and cut it off. So that's what I've done there. Let's go ahead and press this back. It helps if you have a nest that you can sit and press and sew all together. And then now I always just rotated my block counterclockwise.
Okay.
I did it the same, and that worked for my brain.
Just
and so,
your process.
Yep.
Okay.
And so I'm just going to rotate this, and I'm going to line up my strip again. And you do need to make sure you go past the one that you've just sewn on, just a little bit, or at least right in line, so that you have all the seam allowance that you need.
Okay.
And then we're going to start on this one. Next that one, and we can trim. And if you go a little bit too far past your square, you can just carefully pop those stitches out so that you can get your scissors closer to trim that off. And remember, we're not looking for exact here. This is really forgiving. You just don't want too much extra bulk behind, make it difficult for quilting. And so now remember, we're just going to keep rotating counterclockwise, and I'm going to pull a dark from here. And I think I'm going to use this gray. And so we're going to lay this on here. And it's just going to continue like this all the way around, alternating between lights and darks.
Sometimes throwing in a medium, right?
There we go. And then we'll we'll trim this one. And you can, if you don't want to get up and press, finger pressing works pretty darn good. And so you can just roll that back.
So we talked about finger pressing. What is finger pressing? What did you
So
do?
that is just using your fingers or your nails and the hard surface underneath you to kind of give a loose press.
Okay.
It's not going to be perfect or as precise, obviously, as using an iron, but it gives you a pretty good result to make sure you're not getting those creases in your seam if you don't want to take the time to press in between every single one. All right, and so this will be the last strip that we're going to add on this first way around.
And I also want to point out, we're using solids, so
Yeah.
there's not a right side and wrong side, but
Yes.
you'd be putting right sides together when you stitch and then folding it back.
Yes,
Okay.
great tip, Liz. Thank you. All right, so then let's go ahead and press this back.
I feel like this would be me is pressing every time I get a round done and then moving along. Okay.
I think so. That sets you up pretty well because then you only have these tiny seams that are really intersecting each time you go around, and then if you press in between, it works really great. And at my desk, I have my iron right next to my machine.
That's
and
so handy.
It's really handy. I'm not having to get up and walk to press each time. And so I want you to see here that you're just going to continue all the way around, just like we started, and we're just going to keep going in rounds, and it takes 5 rounds. You're going to get to 4, and you're going to have these tiny little corners left, and you're going to want to stop, but you're going to keep going.
Okay.
Because I promise it's not quite enough to cover your seam allowance, and you don't want any edges to pop out and fray. And so just go 5 rounds all the way around. So you can see here, here's my paper, and in some places, because like I said, we've shortened that stitch length, it's already started to come off here, and you can see how easy that pops off.
And it's
Super
also
simple.
that you've stitched right off the edge of those, so you make sure it's overhanging when you're doing those outside pieces.
Yeah, because I actually am, you can use the paper as a guide to trim it up, but because you're taking so many seams, it doesn't stay exactly 10 inches with all of those stitches. And so it's going to be really close, but that's where I think this 10-inch ruler comes in super handy. So I actually do just kind of eyeball it usually and see, and you can look here compared to my paper. I've just got
come in just a tiny bit.
like 1/8 of an inch that it's shrunk in by taking all those stitches.
But that's also why you definitely have to take that last piece in the corner, because it's going to fool you into thinking it's going to fit. Okay.
I learned the hard way. You really
Sneaky
do
ninja.
need that last one all the way around. And so let's go ahead and flip this over, because I like to try and center up my center block. And by taking the time in our squaring to make sure our center square is lined up, you know, on our 5-inch line here and on our 5-inch line here. I'm
just like you glued it down.
Exactly like I glued it down. We're just checking those points to make sure it's really close. And then we can come back and trim off our excess. So there's that and that. And I usually do 2 sides and then rotate, because I don't want to hurt myself. If you have a rotating mat, it could come in handy there. Just check one more time. Everything's lined up. And then we can just trim those off.
So satisfying.
It is so satisfying. Oops, I missed one little spot there where we've got some bulky seams. There we go. And so you can see there is our finished block.
I love it.
It's so simple. It's so quick and really, really satisfying, like I said, when you go to put these together. And you can see I just went ahead and laid them all going the same way. So I alternated, you know, this row starts with the dark at the bottom, and then it switches and the dark is at the top. And it just alternates each time, 6 across by 7 down. Now, some of you might ask, do you take the paper off at this stage, or do you sew it all together? I actually sewed it all together. I left the paper on, sewed it all together. And the reason being, you can see on this little corner that I've gone ahead and pulled off, there is so much stretch just in this style of piecing, because all of these strips now are on the bias, it gives you a lot of wiggle room. So if you are one that is not worried about that at all, you can go ahead and pull them off beforehand. But if you are new and you're worried about a lot of stretch or things, you know, not lining up the way you want, I highly recommend leaving the papers on. It will make it much easier
So
for
it
you.
stabilizes it while
Yep.
you're actually sewing the blocks together. That's smart.
Exactly. And then it was actually super satisfying when I finished the whole quilt top. I shook it. I just gave it like a nice shake. And then Natalie and I just like almost snow angels on top of it to get all of the papers off. And it took us no more than, you know, 10 minutes. It was very
That's
quick.
hilarious.
It was awesome.
Okay.
It was one of the best days in the office. We were just like, you know, swimming in papers. It was awesome. So
Love that.
it's really fun. I hope you enjoyed it. And I do have one more version I want to show you. So this one was all in solids, which I think is great. But I couldn't resist making this cute version.
I know some of you have been looking at this color in the
Yes.
corner.
This one is using this beautiful collection from Minky Kim for Riley Blake as the center. So I used a print charm pack in the middle. And then I pulled colors from this beautiful collection. Let me make sure I've got it. Yes, this is right sides up. I pulled coordinating colors, warms and cool, from the collection. And so instead of true lights and darks, I separate it by warm and cool. And you still get this
That's
awesome
so cool.
result. I really love it. I really love it. And I also just love this backing fabric, so I
So
have to show
beautiful.
it off. It's from her line. It's gorgeous. So don't be afraid to play with, you know, a charm pack that you have. Pull some coordinating solids. And I think you need, let me double check here, 3/4 yards of 8 different
Perfect.
coordinating solids. if
So it
you
looks
want
like
to
you've
do
got
this.
4 cool and 4 warm,
Exactly.
or 4 light and 4 dark.
Exactly. Whichever
is so great.
option you choose. Maybe you want to do all shades of blues and whites. I think that could be stunning.
This
There's-
could look so good in so many colors.
Exactly. I know. My mind was really just kind of racing with all the possibilities. So I hope you have enjoyed this project. I can't wait to see the versions that you make.
Yes. Use that hashtag MSQC show and tell and show us yours. We cannot wait
We
to see.
cannot wait. And until next time, have a fabulous week, and we'll see you soon.